Welcome. You're listening to a Trauma Survivor Thrivers podcast on Mental Health News Radio Network. So much for joining us. I'm Lori Lee Binstock, host of a Trauma Survivor Thrivers podcast on Mental Health News Radio Network and anywhere else you get your podcasts. Today's guest is Nia Renee, a narcissistic abuse recovery coach for her coaching practice, How to Love a Battered Woman LLC. Nia Renee, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. I think I was just sharing 2025 is busy,
Yeah.
and I'm just catching up and getting it together, I feel like.
Yeah, I don't know if busy is the word. I don't know the right word for it. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, yeah.
Okay. I'm trying to figure out why I can't hear myself, but that's okay.
Well, I think you sound great. So
Okay,
that's
good.
all that matters. But I wanted to talk to you because, we were on in a webinar together, and I just felt so aligned with your message. So I first want to talk to you about your story. What is your story? How did you become a narcissistic abuse recovery coach?
So I honestly, it's funny talking about it now because I am someone where I was pretty much like, I was almost like, you couldn't pay me to be a coach because I was, but because I was so concerned about the optics of therapists and counselors and then coaches. And I wanted to make sure that I had my certifications. I just wanted to make sure I had the proper, things to help me along my journey. So I actually launched How to Love a Battered Woman first. And that was while I was in an abusive relationship with my ex-boyfriend. Excuse me. And I was essentially teaching him how to love me. I was teaching my abuser how to love me. And I didn't realize that for quite some time. So I launched that in 2018. And then I launched my coaching practice in 2022 because I really just felt like it was time to just start branching out, and I really wanted to help other people. Like I just really, really, really want to help other people figure out how to step into their power, or redefine their power and step into their purpose. So that was just something that is just really, really important to me.
Well, How to Love a Battered Woman. I would, and you launched this website. And when I think of a battered woman, I think of a trauma survivor. Are you willing to share your story and how you define yourself as a battered woman? I'd like to call you a trauma survivor thriver, but if you could get into that. If you're
I like to call myself a battered heart, and that's what I refer to as my survivors. So I am a battered heart. My story really goes back a long time. As I'm learning in therapy as well, I repressed a lot of trauma, and so I'm realizing how far back my trauma actually began, and it was around the time I was 1 year old. And I was in a very sexually abusive household that I'm realizing now. I was sexually abused by my siblings and my mother. And I knew about my siblings, but I am just now finding out about my mother. And so because I blacked out this whole chunk of time, and I started doing EMDR therapy, which is eye movement desensitization reprocessing, as we've discussed before. And I started to my shout out to Alice, my therapist. Once that portal was opened, it has not been able to be closed since. And so, unfortunately, my mother is a big part of my childhood trauma, but I'm realizing that she's also a big part of my sexual trauma as well. And so that's where the foundation of it started. In a very toxic, very abusive, I was groomed into abuse. I was groomed into a life of abuse by my mother, who worked overtime that my dad never saw it. because it only happened when my dad wasn't around. And when my dad was around, my mom was this loving, caring person. But eventually those lines began to blur and the truth started to come out. And so I started talking to my dad more. I started to confide in him on just my journey and the things that I was experiencing, the things that I was hearing her say, the smear campaigns that she was going on. And my dad and I inevitably ended up getting closer. And so we started talking about everything. I started to let him know everything that was going on. And I didn't realize, I thought it took a long time to get from when I first started telling him what was going on to him and my mom splitting. I thought it was years. And it turns out it was probably a year, like maybe a little,
Mm.
maybe like a year and a half ish. And so my freshman year in high school, before going into my sophomore year in high school, my mother and my uncle set me up to be kidnapped over because I didn't want to go work out with them in my uncle's basement, who was also a track coach and a health teacher and a weight class teacher at my high school that I was going to. And so because I didn't want to go work out in his basement with them because I had practice that morning already and I had a basketball game that night, my mom just completely snapped and she realized she no longer had the control over me that she once thought that she did, and realized that my dad had all of the power, and she snapped. She snapped. And so that is what my foundation is, right? A very
Mm.
abusive, very neglectful, very harmful environment, which set this foundation for the way I perceived relationships should be. Fighting for your man, tough love, struggle love, all of that. And not even just your man, because I am a part of the LGBTQ community. I identify as pansexual, and so it doesn't matter who it is. I have just, the door was just open to all this type of abuse and treatment and mistreatment and the not feeling good enough and not being good enough. And it all started back with my mom. And so I ended up getting into a series of abusive relationships, whether they were physically abusive, sexually manipulative, or coercive. And the one that my most recent ex, before I met my husband, who I refer to as Mr. Narcissist in my book, Letters to You, was the person that opened my eyes to realize that I was dating the male version of my mother.
Mm.
And when I did EMDR the first time, I did because needed to understand what I was navigating and why I was so attracted to these types of people. And so in doing that, I realized that the root cause was my mom. And so once I made that realization, everything in my life changed from that point forward.
Wow. And it's, I feel like that's true, right? I was sexually abused by my father.
I'm so
And
sorry.
it's a terrible, terrible thing, but you know, kudos to us. We've endured, we're healing, we're working on it. But it's true. The people that I've dated prior to my husband were basically my father, right?
Mm,
And and the thing is, I thought it was me the whole time. You know, I needed, I guess it's that familiarity. I needed that familiarity because, I mean, and then once I met my husband, who is wonderful and, not toxic, um, I would just make up things. There was a point where I was making up things like, you don't love me. You don't think
mm,
you don't, like I expected him to treat me the way the people have treated me in my other previous relationships or my father, Um, and that was really hard to wrap my head around, and work through. But I did. So for you though, you had a great relationship with your father, I'm assuming, once all of everything started coming out, and so you had that support.
Yes, my dad was someone that and my dad and I love my dad to death and him and I have a very honest relationship with each other. Um Realizing that he contributed to the chaotic environment, the abusive environment, but seeing it from the lens and understanding that he was also abused. He was also being abused by my mother. And what he was dealing with behind closed doors, he was trying to shield from us, but he didn't know what we were dealing with behind
Mm.
closed doors. And so it was this weird vicious cycle. And mind you, here's the tea on this, right? Because this is what I've been like I literally like tracked all of this in my baby book, mind you. My parents met on or around um May, the end of May 1992, and they got married July 17th, 1992. They knew each other for 35 days. And my dad doesn't know this person. I don't know this person. My siblings don't know who this person is. I have half siblings that I don't speak to because of the abuse and the trauma and all of that. Um,
Right.
but so with my dad, we have a challenging relationship at times because there are behaviors that sometimes he tends to revert back to, and I will put my foot down and I'm like, no, you're not going to talk to me like that. You're not going to treat me this way. We're not going to have this contentious relationship with each other. This is not how this is not what we're going to do. So I've had to really almost reparent and teach my father how I need to be loved. And he's really done a really good job. There are just some issues that we're dealing with and working with around his current wife, which is a whole other saga of things.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
So
So,
much.
but yeah, my dad and I have a close relationship. He's the one that saved me. He literally got in between my uncle and I as my uncle had me over the front seat of the car. And mind you, he was 45 minutes away. So I don't know how he got to me as fast as he did, unless he left from the first time I called him with letting him know. I think he had a feeling. He was like, I need to get home because shit's about to go down, if I can cuss. But
Yes.
he made his way to me. He saved me. And then from there, him and I have just been joined at the hip. And so my father really did his best. And I can give him that empathy and um
Grace.
that grace, because my father really operated from a place of love. He was operating from a place of navigating fear of how to protect his child, because I'm his only child out of the three of
Mm.
us. I share a mother with my three siblings, but I don't we all have different dads. And so um he was trying to figure out how to shield me from this. And basically, all of his decisions that he made going forward, though they impacted me in many ways, he was coming from a place of fear and operating at a place of wanting to protect me and to keep me safe. And
Yeah.
so that I can have grace with him. My mother operated from a place of hatred and anger and jealousy and she couldn't control me. And so I will never have grace for someone who sought out from the very beginning to destroy me, because I didn't
Oh.
become the almost tragedy that they wanted me to become because I was born 2.5 months early.
Mm. You mentioned, your dad saved you
Mhm.
from your uncle. Was this your
Yes.
mom's brother?
My mom's brother. Yeah.
And was he abusive as well?
My mom's brother.
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. I have decided that I'm relaunching my podcast called the Battered Hearts Radio. And this first
Mm.
season is called The High School Files. And I am
Oh.
spilling all the tea about my high school experience and the things that I endured with my uncle. But I will give you a sneak peek by saying, yes, my uncle was insanely abusive, but not just to me. Um, Other kids, rumors for years that he was having inappropriate relationships with students.
Hmm.
Um, he was just one of the things that I held a lot of guilt for a long time was that because my dad didn't press charges, and my dad just wanted to move forward as quickly as possible after the physical altercation and the attempted kidnapping stuff happened. I still had to go to school with him. I still had to be
So he was a
around him.
teacher. He
He
was a
was a
coach.
teacher there. That was the main reason why I went to that
Ah,
school, was because there was a protected family member in that worked there. And they worked in the school, same school district. He's worked in the same school district as my mother did, because my mother was also a teacher. So they worked in the same school district together. My father was a probation officer, and his office was literally like 5 minutes. Like, you could see my mother's school from his office. So so it was just the area that we just so all happened to end up being in. But yes, my uncle was very, very abusive. He was never physically abusive to me after that I recall. But
mhm.
he was very verbally abusive. He went on a lot of smear campaigns. And he wasn't just like that with me. He was like that with everyone. And if there was someone that I really had to say, like, whoa, that is a true narcissist, it would be him.
So you have been surrounded by narcissists your entire life.
My whole entire life. I
Wow.
never had a chance at a normal life.
Oh, well, that's the thing. If you've just been surrounded by narcissists, how do you not realize that a narcissist is not the norm?
Exactly.
Wow.
Exactly. It took a very long time to realize that the people I was surrounding myself with, the relationships that I was finding myself in, the things that just where I ended up, I had no idea that that's not how love was supposed to be. That's not how relationships were supposed to be until I met my best friend. My best friend taught me platonic love. And when she taught me how to be loved platonically, she taught me she taught me what love was supposed to look like in general. And that's
Wow.
insane to say that you learned love from a friend instead of a trusted family member,
Caregiver.
a
Yeah.
caregiver. Yeah.
That,
I mean,
yes.
I learned love from my dad, don't get me wrong, but my dad, like I said, I grew up in, he was very fearful. And so there were a lot of,
Right.
he was very controlling in the things that I did. And so, and especially after I was raped in high school, our
Mm,
relationship essentially just became me just being isolated from the world outside of my sporting events, and basically not allowed to do anything outside of that until I graduated high school. So I was very sheltered after that.
because he
And
was
that
operating from a
happened,
place of fear.
yeah, and that
Yeah.
happened 6 months after the attempted kidnapping at my mom's apartment by one of my brother's friends. That was a childhood friend. So yeah, it just, yeah. So when I tell people my story and they're just like, there's no way, I'm like, I have a hard time of feeling like people are ever going to believe me, because it just doesn't stop. There's just so much more. And I'm just, and at almost 32 years old, I'm uncovering more as time
Yeah.
goes on.
Yeah. It is really hard because, once you've experienced trauma the first time, which it seems like you were born into trauma,
I was
and
born into trauma, yes.
right? Like it just replicates. It's just more trauma because you just don't you're just attracting the trauma because no one's teaching you how to love yourself. No one's teaching you how to love others. No one's not showing true authentic love. Even your father is operating from a place of fear, which yes, there's love there, but there's also fear, right?
Hmm.
And how can you
It
genuinely.
was love with a lot of barriers. It was love with a lot of controlling aspects. I didn't have a normal high school experience. Um, I didn't have. On top of that, I was coined the weird kid. I was, because I was always to myself. I didn't know how to socialize. I didn't know how to make friends. I didn't know how to do any of that, and I didn't know that I was dealing with trauma. I didn't know I was traumatized. So
Right.
it was just this vicious cycle. And from the outside looking in, a lot of people just said that they saw a girl that loved sports but was just to herself. but nobody
Wow.
ever stopped to ask. Like my nickname in high school literally was Ghost because I was you they never if you didn't have class with me or we didn't play sports together,
You
you
didn't
never
see
saw
her.
me. I was in the athletic office every single chance I got because that was my safe space with a trusted adult that was my at school mom.
Mm-hmm.
And I ended up being sheltered so much by schooling officials like deans and principals and vice principals that it almost essentially made me an outcast because everybody saw me as someone that was, I don't know, I guess the you could be I could have been perceived as a kiss ass. I could have been perceived as someone who sucked up to the school administration, and that's what was important to me, and that wasn't the case at all. um those were just the barriers that were in place to protect me from my at school bully. And then I go home to another bully. And so it's just until my parents split. But then even after that, just navigating life. I didn't have a normal high school experience. I don't think I've had a normal life experience, whatever that may be.
Mm-hmm.
I was born into trauma. I was born into sexual abuse. I was born into abuse.
Ugh. And how did you realize? Because you've been so you're it's like that was like your normal, like abuse
Mhm.
and narcissistic abuse. All the abuse seemed normal. When did you realize it was not and that you needed to seek help?
When I was laying next to a man who didn't like me. He told me he loved me, and I believed it,
Mm-hmm.
but he did not like me. And I got to a place where I was supposed to be going to a photo shoot with him the next day to take photos as a couple together. And he was berating me and just like there was nothing I could do that was right. And that's when it clicked that it felt very familiar. And I was texting my best friend, and she made me say the words to her that I was in an abusive relationship.
Wow. That's a good
And
friend.
my best friend, that same best friend. And it was I believe it was the same day that Ariana Grande dropped her Thank You Next album that I broke up with him. And I remembered that because I was like, oh my God, I was so excited. But then that became the album that I listened to because it was very much what I was going through. And so, but I realized that I didn't feel safe. I was sleeping on the edge of the bed. How am I supposed to do life with someone who is treating me this way? I mean, it was just horrendous. Like it was, and then on top of it, there was a lot of sexual trauma in that relationship as well. And if I didn't have sex with him as much as he wanted to, he would scream and yell about it. And or he would be passive aggressive about it or make me feel less than a person because I wasn't committed to being his personal sex slave, essentially, is what he wanted me to be. And that felt a lot like my childhood. And
Oh,
so I was like, something is off here. And I've always felt like something was wrong. I've always felt like something was off. Something was not, I'm not safe. This isn't okay. I've always felt that way. And I leaned into that more and I trusted that more. And I finally said, I gotta go. I can't do this. And I also need to figure out why I'm attracted to why I continuously attract people like this.
wow. And then what did you do?
And then I immediately got a therapist. I well, mind you, at midnight I packed my stuff as much as I could, grabbed my dog, drove to my dad's house, and then by that Sunday, my dad and my stepbrother helped me pack all of my stuff out of my ex's house, and I moved back in with my parents, and I never looked back. I mean, I had one moment of weakness, um, but after that, I was like, yeah, no, I'm done. So, and I never went back. I never saw him again. We did more of exchanging of our stuff and things that I left and whatever. Might have forgotten. There were intentional things that he gave me that were very intentionally to hurt me.
Mm.
Um, like a teddy bear that I bought him. Um, and stuff like that. But he didn't give the PlayStation back that I bought him for Christmas, right?
No, he
But
wanted that.
yeah, he wanted that. But the more sentimental from the heart gifts, he made sure to put in a trash bag and gave back to me. So I just put them in the trash with him and I moved on and I never looked back and I immediately went into EMDR therapy and talk therapy. And I was doing both of those twice a week for like 9 months.
What did it take to heal? Like, I obviously healing is a constant journey, but what did it take for you to be like, I don't recognize that person anymore?
I don't know if I have an answer to that.
Mm,
I feel like I'm still getting to know who I am,
yeah.
but that's just because of new information with, you know, my
Right.
healing journey of the repressed memories and how I'm processing that. Um, right now I can say on the healing journey, I think I'm going back up the slope. Things are starting to look back up on the healing journey.
Mm-hmm.
But this has been a really hard trauma uncovering season for me because my heart was just been really broken by just, what I've uncovered about my mother and the depth that there was just no there was no the depths of which she would go to were unknown. Like she took it really far and she just kept
Yes.
going and she was going to continue to take it far because she couldn't control me. And
Mm,
so um I think for me the turning point was just realizing that there was a pattern.
finding the pattern.
I found the pattern and I was like, okay, this is like my third relationship where I've been in an abuse. This is like my third abusive relationship. Like this is like my third, whatever you want to call it, because the one in between, there was a situationship for some time and whatever. But I'm like, there's a theme going on here, and so what is it? What is happening and why? And so that's why I went to EMDR therapy. Shout out to Dusty, and I intentionally sought a male EMDR therapist because I needed to address my issues with men. And now I intentionally have a woman therapist because I need to address my issues with women.
Mm,
I'm trying to figure out with insurance because I have a black therapist, a black woman therapist, because I need to specifically address my issues with black women, as my mother was a black woman, is a black woman. So I'm very intentional on my healing journey and what I do with my mental health and how I take care of myself and what I talk about and how I talk about it, how I talk to myself. And I think realizing that I unintentionally was just trapped in the cycle of abuse for such a long time until I got out of corporate America in August of last year.
wow.
Abuse is all I've known.
Wow. Well, I have to ask, how do you love a battered woman?
Very gently.
Very gently.
Very gently, very open-mindedly, and I think how to love a battered woman. And mind you, I don't have just women clients. I have all types of clients. I have all genders of clients or non-gender conforming clients. I have several different types of clients. I only named my business How to Love a Battered Woman because I can only speak from a woman's perspective. I
Right.
could only can speak from my perspective. It just so happens to be that a large portion of the people I speak to are women, which is fantastic because we need more of that. We need
Hmm.
more women empowerment. But the biggest part is healing and repairing the relationship with yourself. So you have to look at yourself and ask yourself, how do I love me through all of these things? How do I heal and repair the relationship, the fractured relationship with myself? Like last night, I literally just burned the final items from my baby book that my mother had like physically touched. Like I burned my whole entire baby book. I burned all of my memories, my childhood memories. I cut myself out of my childhood memories that that I wanted to keep. And then everything else of those were burned. And I made collages out of those photos. Some with me and my dad, some with me and my grandpa. There's one photo of my grandma, my blood grandma, and then which who is I call her my grandmother, but she's not my blood grandmother, but she was my mother's best friend. And she completely dumped my mom because of how she treated me and what happened. And
Mm.
she's still in my life right now to this day. My grandmother is. So shout out to my grandmother Deanna. She is amazing. And so yeah, you have to take a look at when we talk about relationships, oftentimes we think about other people. And I think this is what makes me different as a coach in general, is that the number one thing I talk about is the relationship you have with yourself. Because when you look at when you look at how people talk about relationships in general, we talk about the other person. There's other people involved. It's always who you're seeking and what you want and this and that, but it all starts with ourselves, especially trauma survivors, especially those who have been in abusive relationships, especially those who have navigated similar things that we have. We have to heal and repair that relationship with ourselves. We have to love but how do you do that if you don't know how? And that's what I'm here
Right.
for. That's where I help others get to the deep root of figuring out how they need to be loved. And it starts with themselves.
Yeah, and I feel that you start attracting what you need
Mm-hmm.
when you come from a place of authenticity, when you come from a place of love from within yourself. I feel like then you attract that love, and you found that love, right?
I did.
You're married, and how was that? That something completely different, not a narcissist.
Yeah, I was bored, and I was at first, and I was
Yeah.
scared that I was gonna be bored, and I called my best friend, or I'd like texted her or called her, and I was like, "Hey, I don't know if I'm just bored or I don't know what's going on, but I don't know if this relationship is gonna work." And she goes, "Okay, so are you bored or are you safe?" And I
Mm.
almost hung up on her, and I was like, "Okay, got it. I see where we're going in this conversation." And yeah, I set boundaries very early on with him in our relationship. I told him, I was like, I don't do yelling, I don't do screaming. I am a nonviolent communicator. I am someone, if we can't have a conversation like we're having right now, when issues arise in our relationship, then this is not the relationship for me. And he was like, where do I sign? Because same. And we've been together, it'll be 4 years, 4.5 years on the 1st of February, and married for 2.5 years on the 1st of February. And
Congratulations.
thank you. And we've never gotten into an argument. We've never crossed those lines with each other. We've never, I mean, we say we've gotten close, but there are times where we felt like the heat was rising, but that was like twice, and it's never really happened. But I've had to do a lot of growing myself and realizing that the patterns that I learned of just being quickly irritated and my control issues really affected my husband in the beginning, because I would snap and and I didn't realize my tone, but I started to realize when I was doing it, the look on his face. And that helped
Well,
me a lot, seeing that I was causing him pain and that I needed to address and work through some of those learned behaviors that were passed on by my mother. So it's been a really learning and growing experience, but I am so deeply in love with this man. I am so happy in my relationship. It's like the rest of my life right now doesn't make a lot of sense, but my relationship does. And that's the first time. Like usually the rest of my life makes sense, but my relationships don't. And so being married to my husband, he has healed so many different versions of myself that I didn't even know I needed healed.
hmm yeah.
And he's loved every version of myself, whether he's known it or not. He plays a huge role in my EMDR therapy right now.
Wow.
He is one of my safe spaces. So that man he deserves the world.
Oh, that's so beautiful. And, it is interesting because, right, we are so familiar with the chaos that when it's not chaotic, it may seem boring, right?
Yeah.
And I think I
I was
had to
like,
learn that
oh
too.
Lord, this is
I don't know what's happening here, but this is
yeah, but it was
not,
just calm.
it was
It wasn't used
calm.
to
It was
calm.
safe. I love that
Hmm.
your friend asked that. Is it
Yeah, she was like,
boring
"Are
or
you
is it
bored or is
safe?
it safe?" And I was like, "All right, well, so we're starting off with this conversation.
Yeah.
I'm hanging up now." Cause she's really good. She's so good at not call but calling me out in a good way. And it
Right,
was an
right.
important question to ask, but yeah, I mean, he only yells and gets excited during football games. Bills are playing. Go Bills. Shout out to Bills. We got to beat the Chiefs this weekend. And when he's playing his video games, and even then he really tries to really tries to not have those outwardly reactions because he knows that it can easily trigger me. And so having someone even modify some of their behaviors, their natural reactions when they're playing video games, knowing that that burst of whatever can trigger me is something that I didn't even know how to handle. I was like, "What? What do you
Yeah.
mean? You care?
Wow.
You like me? That's crazy."
Well, I think, it is that, it's communicating, right? I mean, I'm
Mhm.
sure that they're challenging and difficult times, but he knows not to yell. But you also know how to communicate well with
Yes.
each other and
Oh, we're so
communicate
in
the hard
tune.
conversations.
Well, sometimes because the
Hmm.
the hard conversations, sometimes we would go around each other. Like we're so worried about hurting the other person, or we're so worried about where the other person is because I'm a chronic illness survivor and a 6-time brain surgery survivor. My medical trauma has been pretty astounding as well.
Oh my goodness.
So it got to a place where we were essentially doing the same thing where we weren't communicating with each other, but we were doing it out of place of love instead of out of a place of not love. And so we had to figure out how to communicate with each other to where we weren't so worried about how the other person was going to react. It wasn't worried about how the other person was going to react. We were more so worried about if it was going to hurt the other person's feelings or cause them stress or anything
Hmm.
like that. So we had to figure out how to have those conversations with each other. But once we did, yeah, I mean, we're good.
Wow, amazing. Nia Renee, is there anything else that you would like to add? Because I feel like this was such a wonderful topic to chat about. Because I think
Um,
self-love, your healing.
yeah.
I can't believe all of the trauma that you've experienced, and
And this is like you got like
it sounds like
this
a
is
little
like a
snippet.
this is a snippet. Yeah, this is a really quick like run through of the things that I have endured. It would take a long time probably to go through and be able to adequately explain all the things that I've gone through, but that's a part of the journey. And
And check out our podcast that's coming
yeah,
up.
check out my
Yeah,
podcast
book.
that
I'll have all of that in
should be
there.
launching. Yes, this should be launching next month. I'm just saying I haven't fully committed to a start date, but I did say I was gonna start bringing it back in February. So I renamed it, new logo, everything.
Mm.
But yeah, you guys can check me out on my social media. I'm at How to Love a Battered Woman everywhere. And you can find me on my website at www.howtoloveabatteredwoman.com. And that's where you'll find everything that I have, my courses, my coaching, my books, media, everything. So yeah, thank you for having me.
Oh my gosh, thank you. I'm
You're
so
incredible, by
grateful.
the way.
That's
You're
no.
absolutely amazing.
I appreciate you. Thank you so much.
I appreciate you.
That was Nia Renee, coach and founder of How to Love a Battered Woman LLC. For more information, visit howtoloveabatteredwoman.com. You can also find the link in the show notes, books, everything there. February's issue of Authentic Insider is out, and actually Nia Renee did contribute, so you have to check it out. That you can find all of that traumasurvivorthriver.com. Again, you can also find past issues of Authentic Insider and past episodes of a Trauma Survivor Thrivers podcast. Be sure to subscribe to my email list to get Authentic Insider magazine in your inbox monthly, and you can find that at traumasurvivorthriver.com. You've been listening to a Trauma Survivor Thrivers podcast on Mental Health News Radio Network. I'm Lori Lee Binstock. Thank you so much for being a part of the conversation. Take care.